It's great to see all of you here today and appreciate you taking your lunch hour to talk with us a little bit more about the results of our electric vehicle survey. It is the most comprehensive survey ever conducted of electric vehicle owners in the state of Maine, and we're proud to have pulled that off this year. We had two other electric vehicle surveys in 2014 and 2018. So this is 4 years later, we're checking in to see what the state of electric vehicle ownership in Maine is right now. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Natural Resources Council of Maine, but to give you a little sense of who we are, we were founded in 1959 by a group of Maine people who came together to protect the Allagash River, and have since grown into a statewide nonprofit membership organization dedicated to restoring and conserving Maine's environment now and for future generations. We harness the power of law, science, and the voices of more than 25,000 supporters to build a healthier environment for future generations. We craft policy and advocate for bipartisan solutions on the local, state, and federal level that will lead to clean air and water, healthy forests, and a thriving local communities. We work side by side with Mainers in all 16 counties and are excited that all of you are here to join us today. And I think we might even have attendees from all 16 counties today. We certainly had survey respondents from all 16 counties, which is exciting. The Natural Resources Council of Maine recognizes that we work on the unceded territory of the Wabanaki people. We recognize and honor the current tribes who comprise the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseet, and the Micmac peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout generations. Let us acknowledge this history today and commit to the ongoing work of decolonization as we strive for a more inclusive, just, and healthy Maine. So to introduce myself, I am Josh Caldwell. I'm the Climate and Clean Energy Outreach Coordinator with the Natural Resources Council of Maine. I'm very excited to share the results of our electric vehicle survey with all of you today. As I mentioned before, this is the third iteration of our electric vehicle owner survey, the first two having been conducted in 2014 and 2018. In each of these instances, we've reached out to all of the electric vehicle owners in the state, plug-in hybrid and full battery electric vehicle owners alike, to learn about the electric vehicle ownership experience in Maine. Our results this year were illuminating in many ways, both on their own and in comparison to the previous two surveys that we conducted. For example, in 2018, there were 1,300 electric vehicle owners in the state to learn from. And now, as of our 2022 survey, which was mailed out in April, there were over 6,800 electric vehicle owners, and I'm sure that there are more now, as our survey was mailed out a few months ago. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the results shortly, but I do want to start by putting the survey into context in terms of our political and climate setting. There will be time for questions and discussion after the presentation. Throughout, feel free to enter questions into the Q&A box or in the chat. And then after our presentation, we'll go through those questions and answer as many as we can during the time that we have. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jack to give us a little bit more background on the Maine electric vehicle scene, and I'll have Kristen share the slides with us.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Kristen, for sharing those slides. And thanks, everyone, for joining today, taking time out of your busy days to hear about EVs and our survey. You can go to the next slide. You can go to the next slide, Kristen. So I want to start by putting, as Josh said, putting all this in a little bit of context. We here in the Climate and Clean Energy program here at NRCM, we approach our work on electric vehicles with a climate lens. And so I think it's to put our EV goals and the work that we do in context here in Maine. Want to touch on some of the progress that we've made as a state. And we have made a ton of progress over the past several years on climate and energy policy. In 2019, started sort of a wave of climate and energy legislation. We increased our renewable portfolio standard, that is how much of our electricity comes from renewables. Those targets up to 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. We set new targets for greenhouse gas reductions as well. And I think possibly most impactfully, we created a climate council with bipartisan representation from all across the state, from all kinds of sectors. And after a year or so of work, they came up with Maine Won't Wait, our state's sort of comprehensive climate action plan. And that plan came out in late 2020, and we've been doing a lot of work since then to implement that plan, including work on electric vehicles. But I think where electric vehicles sits within this plan is in this sort of core strategy of electrification. That is getting our energy from renewable energy, but also shifting all the end uses that we have of energy away from fossil fuels for heating our homes and buildings or powering our cars and trucks, and switching those to electricity. So you can go to the next slide, Kristen. So EVs is a critical part of our transportation emissions, which is about half of the emissions that come from fossil fuel combustion here in Maine. This is from the latest DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, report on greenhouse gas emissions in Maine. And as you can see, nearly half of our emissions coming from fossil fuels come from transportation. So I think there's some good news in this to sort of pull out of this beautiful pie chart here. But that is that most of the technologies that we need to eliminate emissions from these key sectors, whether that's residential, commercial, or transportation, or electric power, we have the technologies that we need. They're no longer particularly new or alternative. In many cases, the costs of those technologies have dropped dramatically in the past 10 or 15 years. And once these technologies are in use, once they're installed, they're just simply better experiences for the people using them. Heating with heat pumps is in an efficient building is more comfortable for the people who live and work or go to school in them. Driving EVs, as we'll see, is a better driving experience than driving a combustion vehicle. Cooking on an induction stove, if you haven't done it yet, is fantastic and doesn't create indoor air pollution. Burning fossil fuels often comes with a lot of other really important downsides like health impacts and other pollution impacts. But since transportation is our #1 sector source of emissions, that's a big priority. And you can go to the next slide. And that's why it's really our #1 goal in Maine's climate action plan. It's to accelerate Maine's transition to electric vehicles. Now, it must be said that just swapping EVs in for other combustion cars isn't going to be enough to reduce our transportation emissions. We also need to do a lot more to create a more diverse transportation system across Maine, where it's safer, where people can safely choose to go about their days without having to drive. But it's also clear that electrification of cars and trucks is going to be key. So you can see here we have some pretty ambitious EV goals: 41,000 EVs on the road by 2025 and 219,000 by 2030. And you can go to the next slide. So those goals are intended to put Maine on a path to reducing emissions to where they need to be, but it's also Maine's important part of what is really a massive global trend. The auto industry globally is and has decisively moved towards an electric vehicle future. EV sales globally doubled in 2021. Annual sales have gone up 55-fold since 2012, from about 120,000 a year to about 6.5 million per year. There's about $500 billion of investment in EVs on the books from between 2022 and 2026. Several automakers have made commitments to phase out production of gas cars entirely, including General Motors, but also some other manufacturers like Volvo and Volkswagen. But we have to accelerate this trend as well. If we are, because the climate impacts and the impacts of pollution on people just aren't going to wait. Next slide. So there are policies that have been on the books to help accelerate that transitions. Some of the key ones have been EV tax credits and rebates. There has been a $7,500 federal EV tax credit on the books for several years. That was capped per manufacturer. So each manufacturer, like Toyota or Ford, customers could only receive rebates for the first few 100,000 vehicles that EVs that those manufacturers made, and a lot of those were mostly exhausted for some of the bigger manufacturers. There's also a $2,000 EV rebate administered by Efficiency Maine right here in the state. It's a $1,000 for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And happy to say that funding was extended for that rebate program in the last legislative session. An additional $3.5 million were put towards that. So next slide. So we clearly need more support to get more people into these EVs. As you'll see from some of the results, people love driving electric vehicles. They save people money, they reduce pollution. And so the good news is something that we can rarely say, which is in getting those supports to get more people into EVs, we recently had Congress come and save the day. So this month, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which I hope many of you have heard of. It's a monumental climate bill, addition to having some really important health policies in there as well. But there's some key pieces in there that speak to electric vehicles. The Inflation Reduction Act extends and expands the federal EV tax credit. It includes a new used EV tax credit of $4,000, which is going to be really important, especially in a low-income state like Maine, where a lot of people don't buy new vehicles. Also includes a commercial vehicle tax credit. That's another, we won't spend too much time on that now, but that's another really important piece of reducing transportation emissions. And it includes some other key requirements. It has it excludes luxury vehicles, like really expensive luxury EVs. It has some income caps, so the wealthiest individuals aren't eligible for it. And it includes some escalating domestic supply chain requirements. So it only applies to vehicles that are assembled in North America, and over time will increasingly only apply to vehicles that have batteries and come with battery materials that come from either domestically here in the US or from some of our free trade partners. So there will likely be a little bit of confusion with some of these tax credits about which vehicles they apply to over the coming years. But overall, this is analysts believe that this is going to be really important to helping to get more people into EVs and start saving money, reducing pollution, and having that much better driving experience. One other just key point that I want to make, and on the next slide, is about charging infrastructure. Charging infrastructure is going to be critical to enabling widespread adoption of EVs more than we've seen now. The Inflation Reduction Act also includes a business tax credit for businesses to install EV chargers, either for their own fleets or for customers. The bipartisan infrastructure law, which passed last year, included $7.5 billion for EV charging nationwide. And here in Maine, partly funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Efficiency Maine, the Department of Transportation, other state agencies have a $37 million EV charging infrastructure plan that's currently in the process of being approved and should roll out soon. And that's just going to build on the public chargers that really are more available than ever, although more work needs to be done there. So that's just to sort of set some context around where we've been in terms of policy and some of the things that have been happening. But I'm going to turn it back over to Josh to talk about what we learned from people in Maine who are already driving EVs and what their experience has been like. So Josh, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So yeah, to dive into our survey results, hopefully you all have had the opportunity to look over our recently released report. We sent that out in a couple of emails last week. It's also available on our website. So if you haven't yet downloaded that report, you can find that link on our website, or you can keep an eye out for our follow-up email from this webinar, which will include the report link, so you can take a peek at it. What you're looking at now is the top 10 make and models of electric vehicles in Maine from our survey, and the top 10 electric vehicle manufacturers. We sent our survey to over 6,800 electric vehicle drivers around the state, and we received over 1,230 responses from all 16 counties. So we heard from about 1/5 of the total electric vehicle driver population in Maine, which is a really great result. If you can jump to the next slide, Kristen. There are now over 5 times as many electric vehicles on the road as there were the last time we did this in 2018. And we're seeing that a lot higher proportion of those vehicles are fully battery electric vehicles. So 44% of Maine's electric vehicle population is now fully electric. That's compared to 30% of the electric vehicle population in 2018. This growth is also reflected in the model year of the electric vehicles on the road today. So of our survey, over 80% of electric vehicles that responded to the survey were a 2017 model year or later. So we're really seeing that escalating effect as we move forward. So we're seeing a lot more electric vehicles on the road, but we really wanted to know what people are saying about their experience with those vehicles. So if we could jump to the next slide, Kristen. So largely really good things. We gained a lot of quality insights throughout this analysis process, but what we really wanted to know by and large was, do people like their electric vehicles, and would they recommend them to others? So the answer is overwhelmingly yes. 98% of respondents would recommend an electric vehicle to their neighbor. 97% of respondents say that their vehicle is easy and affordable to maintain, and 99% say that their vehicle is reliable. This is about as close to unanimous as it gets for any product, let alone an essential day-to-day tool like a vehicle. We also saw some really good indicators around cost savings, and we can jump to the next slide for those, Kristen. We now know that the average new electric vehicle has the same or lower lifetime cost as compared to a comparable gas-powered model. And our respondents reported cost savings on gasoline as the second top reason for purchasing an electric vehicle. 56% of respondents reported saving $50 or more per month on gas costs, and 79% reported saving at least $25 a month on gas costs after making the switch to electric vehicles. I do want to note, you'll see there on the graph that 27% of our respondents reported over $100 per month on gas savings. And it's also worthwhile noting that we sent the survey out in April, which was before the peak of gas prices early in the summer. So we can imagine that gas savings have only increased since that time. On the flip side, we aren't seeing drastic increases in monthly electric bills, which is really good to see. 23% of our respondents, about a quarter, reported no significant increase at all. And only 17% reported seeing their electric bill increase by $20 or more per month after purchasing an electric vehicle and charging at home. So now we can jump to the next slide. Here we're taking a look at why people are purchasing electric vehicles and the concerns associated with making that decision. So the majority of drivers, as you'll see here, made the switch to electric for environmental reasons. 79% of folks identified reducing air pollution or climate change as their #1 reason for switching to an electric vehicle. But coming in second was saving money on gasoline, with 44% of drivers. Reducing our dependence on foreign oil and an interest in new technology were also prominent responses. And then in terms of what drivers like about their driving experience now that they have an electric vehicle, we saw a quiet ride, climate benefits, and overall vehicle performance take the top 3 spots, and then reliability and gas savings coming in close behind at 4 and 5. The #1 dislike for electric vehicle drivers for their driving experience was battery range limits. About a third disliked that there were those limits. which we will get to more shortly. And at second place for dislikes, 27% of respondents wrote that there was nothing that they disliked about their electric vehicle, which is promising. Now we can jump to the next slide. This depicts, oh, my apologies, we should have jumped to this one earlier, but now you get a visual depiction of some of the things that folks like most about their electric vehicle. I noticed that benefit climate came in at number 2, but most of the top responses were about performance. And you'll see speed, technology, and reliability all coming in the top 6 there. Now we can jump to the next one. So this was my favorite question. I think it's a good question. We basically asked owners about the concerns they held prior to buying or leasing an electric vehicle versus the concerns that remain after they had a chance to get behind the wheel. And across the board, concerns held prior to the purchase were largely decreased after the purchase was made. In fact, that was true of every single one of the concerns that were listed. So of particular note, concern about home charging dropped by 86% from before to after purchase. Concern about the cost of insurance dropped by 80%. Concern about upfront costs dropped by 79%. Concern about charging costs dropped by 73%. Concern about affordable maintenance dropped by 58%. And concern about four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive availability dropped by 54%. And I saw a question there in the chat about all-wheel drive availability. There are more and more models that are becoming available with all-wheel drive, including I just had a chance to go out to Sanford yesterday and meet with the owner of a Jeep Wrangler that had all-wheel drive capacity and off-roading capacity. And we're seeing some models of electric trucks and the new Subaru that are also all-wheel drive as well. So those concerns are all dropping significantly. 7% of respondents indicated that they had no concern prior to their purchase, while 12% indicated having no concerns following the purchase, which is almost twice as many. We did see 3 prominent concerns that carried through for our electric vehicle driver population. Not having enough public charging stations was number 1, winter performance number 2, and range concerns number 3. All of these did drop significantly. As you'll see, concern about range dropped by 42% and concern about winter performance dropped by 41%. So that's encouraging, but they were still the top concerns that people had. Despite having these concerns, Mainers are still overwhelmingly recommending electric vehicles to others, which is really good to see. So now we can move on to charging habits and jump to the next slide. By and large, electric vehicle owners charge at home overnight. And as I was collecting some of these more anecdotal testimonials, this was referenced as one of the areas of convenience for electrical vehicle ownership. You can just come home, plug it in, and then the next morning, your battery is full and you're ready to go for the day. So as I said, 90% of survey respondents cited that their primary charging station is at their home, with other public level 2 chargers, DC fast chargers en route to a destination, and level 2 chargers associated with shopping, cited as important and occasional other charging options. 5% of respondents noted that workplace charging is an important charging location. This is something to improve, is the amount of workplaces that have available charging stations for electric vehicle drivers that work there. 66% of respondents use public chargers, about 2/3 of the electric vehicle population in the state. This can also improve, but that's up from 50% of users having used public chargers in 2018 and only 33% in our 2014 survey. So we're seeing a proportional increase by about 1/3 each time we do this survey. More and more folks are using the public chargers that are available, and we are seeing more and more chargers, with more to come through some of the big buckets of funding that Jack mentioned earlier. So it is clear that we need to build out our public charging network, and recent funding dedicated to electric vehicle charging is encouraging to see. You can find more information about plans to expand our electric vehicle charging network at the Efficiency Maine website. Also of note, 73% of electric vehicle drivers reported that they are more likely to go to a business or destination if charging is available there, which indicates that charger installation will be a big benefit to local economies around the state if they are located in village centers and near small businesses. Next slide, please, Kristen. So here are a couple of notes that I found interesting. We'll open things up to discussion after some of these additional findings. Of the 2022 respondents to the survey, 87% own their vehicle, while 13% lease their vehicle. So in 2018, 68% owned and 29% leased, which indicates to us that buying outright is becoming a more popular route as electric vehicles become normalized and more reliable, and also as people take advantage of existing rebates and tax credits. 32% of respondents in 2022 do not have another vehicle. About a third are relying solely on their electric vehicle, which is up from 22% in 2018, also an indicator in an increase in trust and reliability for electric vehicle owners in the state. Of those who do own another vehicle, over 50% own a truck, van, or SUV, which I found really interesting. More and more medium and heavy duty vehicles are coming onto the market. We have a few truck models coming onto the market. We have several transit vans that are fully electric now. So we hope to see those larger vehicles being replaced with electric versions as we progress through the years here. Also of note, 10% of second vehicles, so vehicles that were not the primary electric vehicle of use, are also electric vehicles, up from 3% in 2018. So of those who own second vehicles, 10% of those vehicles are also electric vehicles, which is great to see. And then finally, over half of respondents regularly commute with their electric vehicle, despite pandemic circumstances. And 62% of those commuters commute 10 or more miles in one direction. So electric vehicles are really a viable commuting option for typical Mainers. Here in Maine, we do have one of the highest commute distances on average of any state. And I'm seeing the question, what is PHEV? I appreciate that. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So we have two distinctions: battery electric vehicle or all electric vehicle, and then plug-in hybrid electric vehicle that has a certain amount of range based on electric, and then also uses gasoline. So we are really looking forward to using these results to share with prospective electric vehicle buyers. I think this is a great resource for people who are considering making that switch. We're also going to continue to use this to push for electric vehicle adoption to meet our climate goals through various advocacy arms and meeting with decision makers at our state legislature and in state agencies to continue to provide more incentives for electric vehicle charging and purchasing, and accelerating the transition to electric vehicles. So there are questions out there in the chat that I'm seeing, but before we jump over to them, I did want to share a couple of notes from my recent work to meet up with some of the electric vehicle owners around the state to hear more detailed insights about their experiences. This was my favorite part of this process, is actually reaching out to some of the people who completed our survey to hear more from them about their experience and have an opportunity to actually meet with them to have that conversation and to collect some video and photos of them doing their thing with their electric vehicles so that other Mainers can see how electric vehicles are used throughout the state. So I reached out to a lot of the folks that completed our survey and had an unbelievable amount of responses saying, yes, I'd love to chat with you. We've been able to get out to 17 and counting drivers throughout the state, from Lubec to Greenville to Leamington. And it was a real treat to see how these vehicles are actually used day to day. And the owners are generally really pumped to share more information about their experience. So just to go through a couple of these conversations that I really enjoyed. Gail and McGinley in the lower left of your screen there own the Lubec Brewing Company, about as far east as you can get in Maine. And they have 2 Nissan Leafs that they use for delivering beer around town and getting out to their camp and back, which is about 45 miles away. Then Jim in the upper left there, he's in Old Town and he hitches a trailer to his electric vehicle to help with yard work and mulch towing, which I thought was really fun. He has a beautiful space there on the Penobscot. And Justin in the lower right of your screen uses his workplace charger in Orono to stay charged up through the work week so that he can have a full battery after his work day. The last one on this slide here is Marianne, who lives in Penobscot. And she gave an interesting insight that I hadn't considered, which is that her dog loves their electric vehicle and is much more comfortable riding in it than their previous gas-powered vehicle. and they did a side-by-side test where they have a current gas-powered vehicle and an electric vehicle, and their dog is much more relaxed and comfortable in the EV, which I thought was interesting. I heard a similar experience, if you can jump to the next slide, Kristen, from Michael. Michael owns a wildlife watching company in Bar Harbor on Mount Desert Island. And he noted in the Chrysler Pacifica, which is that van model down in the lower right, that he's able to, with the electric mode, sneak up on birds a lot more easily than he had previously been able to, and provide a more intimate experience with the nature of Mount Desert Island for people that are coming to see wildlife, which is really interesting. Serena in Waterville is pictured lower left there. Really loves her electric vehicle and feels that she's setting an example for her young kids, and also is really excited about the fact that her kids are not exposed as often to fossil fuel exhaust. And Dick in the upper left-hand corner with his family there, they own 3 Nissan Leafs amongst the 3 of them, which was really fun to go and film a fleet of electric vehicles driving around in rural Maine. And they also have an electric vehicle, or an electric mower, and an electric chainsaw, and they installed solar recently, and they're almost fully able to support all of their yard work and all of their driving with free energy coming from the sun, which is really promising. Finally, Ben in Windham owns Bumbleroot Organic Farm in the upper right. He has one of the first fully electric transit vans in Maine, and has been really enjoying that it can get them to Portland and back to all of their farmers market and vendor needs on a charge, and they're not spending any money on gas. And as you can imagine, with organic farming, margins are tight, and that's been a huge benefit to them to be able to skip the gas station. So this was a really fun project, and it's an ongoing project. We want to continue to meet up with electric vehicle owners around the state and hear more from them about their experiences. And we're really excited to be able to parallel that with statistical results about how people are using electric vehicles and what their experiences are like. So I'm seeing questions rolling in here, and I think that we should jump over and answer some of those. So I wonder, Kristen, between the chat and the Q&A, where we should start.
Sure. Let's start with a couple in the chat that are related to each other, and folks asking about the cost of charging at home, and if perhaps it's affordable for some people because they have solar, or if you don't have solar, is it still an affordable option for people?
We found by and large that it's an affordable option for people regardless of whether or not they have solar. Electric rates did not increase as much as savings on gas increased, so that was really, really promising to see. We did see a lot of people co-locating solar panels with their electric vehicle charging station, which is a great option for those that are able to. But by and large, we aren't seeing the increases in electricity bill prices month to month, which is really encouraging. Jack, if you want to add any more to that, you can.
No, that's I think that's exactly right. And there's another question in the chat from Linda about developing R&D to develop battery materials and longer ranges. I think what this survey really shows us is that while it's clear that the EV market and EV supply, EV costs, EV infrastructure is all going to continue to develop, that right now, nearly every single person in Maine who drives an EV is excited about it and thinks that it's a no regrets transition that they've made for them. So if whether or not it makes sense to wait, or what the cost implications are for anyone individually, I mean, that's something that folks should look at. But if we're looking at the experiences of everyone that we asked, the savings on what people were paying for gas outweighs the increase in electricity prices, and in terms of range and even with, people wanting to see more charging stations available and things like that, people are still saying, well, I would definitely recommend these to others, and I'm happy with the experience that I'm having. So that's, I think, the big takeaway related to those couple questions.
Great, yeah, and you mentioned batteries, Jack. Let's stay on that topic. We had a question from Russ in the Q&A asking about the carbon footprint of battery production and how that compares to a gasoline-powered vehicle.
Yeah. Is it all right if I take this one, Josh?
Go for it. I'm finding the link that will answer this question, but I can go ahead in the chat while you answer verbally.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. Anytime we make a substitution in like this, it's important to keep those things in mind, not just, what the tailpipe emissions, but the whole life cycle emissions of the technology. And for EVs, a substantial part of that is the manufacturing of the batteries. The good news is that of all of the analyses that have been done, the life cycle emissions of EVs are far, far lower than those of combustion vehicles. It's easy to, because it's sort of the status quo energy system that we have, it's easy to forget that fossil fuel infrastructure and fossil fuel extraction and refining and transportation and all of those really have massive impacts. And while the EV battery production is not zero impact, it's still something that we need to work to minimize. It is in most analyses shown to be much lower, both in terms of carbon footprint and in terms of other footprint as well. The other thing that I would mention that's related to the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the domestic supply chain requirements that are going to be attached to these EV tax credits going forward is that we believe that that's going to have a big impact on the development of a battery recycling industry here in the United States. Because recycled batteries or batteries that are made from recycled content domestically or amongst our free trade partners is going to be eligible, under that, under those rules. So that's going to be a really important thing as the EV market expands, as we start to see older EVs and the need to deal with the end of life for some of these batteries, because I think probably most of the people on this call, believe that we should be thinking carefully about the end of life as well for all of these clean energy technologies, not just while they're in use.
Great, thanks. Orion had a couple questions in the chat that I think you could answer, Josh, about the breakdown between trucks, cars, vans, SUVs, and if any EV truck owners were surveyed.
It's a great question. So we largely the people that responded to our survey and that were surveyed were not truck or van owners. We've been seeing trucks and vans coming in the last few months and have an opportunity to go meet up with a few of those kind of bow wave owners. But largely the composition of the survey that we did was sent to mostly sedan owners, which is by and large what electric vehicles are on the market at the moment. But the Ford Lightning, a couple of Rivian models, and some of those transit vans are coming onto the market now. And we're seeing rebates for those as well. So hopefully the next time we do this survey, we'll see a much higher proportion of trucks and vans surveyed as well.
Great. We had a question here from Rob about the timing of the expansion of the charging network throughout the state on the interstates and the highways. Could either of you speak to when we can expect to see that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So as I mentioned before, Efficiency Maine has a detailed plan for expanding the electric vehicle public charging network. Part of that plan is through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the NEVI funding that was allocated through that. We're going to be seeing that money implemented soon. So those stations are being built as we speak. And then we'll be seeing another bucket of funding for public charging come through the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act. And we'll be seeing that over the next 6 months and then for years to come. This also speaks to a question that Scott asked in the chat about updating our map of electric vehicle registration by town that we did with our last electric vehicle survey. We are updating that map. That should come at some point at the end of September or October. Part of the process of updating that is updating all of the electric vehicle chargers that are coming onto the grid. There are a lot of them coming on week by week at this point, and so we're seeing a pretty rapid expansion of the charging network. But those two big buckets of funding, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, are really the ones to look out for. And in terms of the timing, Efficiency Maine has the information about when those are going to be deployed.
And Josh, just to add to that, I think Rob had a follow-up about rapid charging stations. Yeah, that plan includes both. Some of it is going towards the level 2 or sort of the regular chargers, and some of it is going for those DC rapid chargers as well.
Great. Let's see, we've had a number of questions both in the chat and in the Q&A about the tax credit. So could we clarify the time limits on the federal tax credit, and then a little bit more about the new stipulations in the IRA and the need for the sourcing of the components in the US. I lost the question.
Jack, can I pass that one to you for Inflation Reduction Act expertise?
Yeah, I think I think it's a complex question, but I think the piece about sourcing battery materials. So overall, what the specifics of the tax credit is that it's a $7,500 tax credit as it was before, but a couple things are changed that are important. One is that it lifts the manufacturer cap so that manufacturers that make lots of EVs will still be able, customers will still be able to get those credits from those buying vehicles from those manufacturers. Another important thing that I don't think we mentioned is that the tax credit is now transferable to dealers, which means that people can actually sort of get that tax credit right away as a markdown on the purchase price, instead of having to sort of do it as part of their annual taxes and wait until April to see those come back. So that's an important thing. But the eligibility for the tax credit comes in two parts. Half of it is, so one is that the vehicle has to be have the final assembly done in North America. That's sort of the top line. Every vehicle has to have that. But half of it is about the battery itself. So those need to be made either in the US or amongst our free trade partners. So that's largely Mexico and Canada, but some other countries as well. And then the other half is that the minerals and the processing of those minerals also have to come from either domestically or from some of our free trade partners. And I won't get into it right now, but there's sort of percentages over time, over the 2020s, that where those percentages increase. And that's where I think some of the confusion may come in about, because there's essentially going to be a rolling list of which model years and vehicles are manufactured where. But I think we've already seen companies responding to these nudges. Hyundai, which makes the Hyundai Kona, they had plans for a factory in Georgia, and they announced in the last week that they were going to be starting construction on that immediately, instead of later on next year. There have been a couple of other announcements that I've seen about battery factories. There was now it's slipping my mind whether it was VW or Volvo. I think it was VW just announced a Canadian partnership to do a battery manufacturing facility. so that their vehicles would be eligible more quickly for these tax credits. So I think overall, this is gonna be a huge positive in terms of having the benefits shared here in the U.S. for these supply chains, and also sort of reducing the life cycle emissions overall about having these built here instead of shipped here from somewhere else. But it is going to be a little bit complicated for the next few years, as people need to sort out which models are eligible for the tax credits. The used vehicle tax credit does not include any of those requirements. So any used EV should be starting in 2023 should be eligible for that $4,000 tax credit.
And that's very exciting. That's something we've been waiting for, and we know is going to be a catalyst for EV adoption in Maine, is having the used market both expand and have incentives associated with it. So that is a really big piece of the Inflation Reduction Act that we were excited to see come through.
Great. We had someone asking more questions about the electric transit van that Ben has in Wyndham. Josh, if you know much about it, do you know any more about the range that he gets and how often they use it?
I do, yeah. So they get about 130 miles of range on a full charge. With a level 2 charger, it takes 4 to 6 hours to fully charge up. So they can do that each and every day with relative ease. Bumble Root Farm, if you haven't been, is also on the cutting edge of a lot of really great clean energy tech. They have some solar panels that they've also installed. So they're able to charge their electric vehicle fully on power that is brought to them by their solar panels. It's a really exciting development. It's an extended cab transit van. It's huge. I can stand up fully in it. And it sometimes is too much space for them, which was exciting to hear. You know, I think a lot of people typically associate electric vehicles with the smaller models that they historically have been, but we're beginning to see that some of the larger models, the all-wheel drive models, the pickups and the vans are becoming fully electrified. And so that's the other exciting aspect about the transit van they have, is that it's not even a plug-in hybrid. It's fully battery electric and has a range that can take them 65 miles away and 65 miles back, which is more than enough for their day-to-day use.
Great. We had a question here from Linda, who asked how much it is to install home charging, if you know, and notes that she lives halfway close to North Pole, so they don't have any public stations near them. And then if there's any people or agencies that she can follow up with for support as well.
That's a great question. So I'll answer first by saying that, you can install a level 2 charger in your home. There are rebates for level 2 charging installation available via Efficiency Maine, so you should certainly look into that before making that decision. You also don't need a level 2 charger. You can plug right into a wall outlet, which doesn't cost anything to install. The person that I met with yesterday has a portable charging socket that they can take and plug into any outlet that they find. This does charge at a slower rate, but still over the course of 12 hours, the course of an evening, it will fully charge a typical electric vehicle. Level 2 charging installations do vary by what company you use and whether or not the level 2 charger was associated with the purchase of the electric vehicle. But by and large, just be sure that you're looking out for the level 2 charging installation rebate offered by Efficiency Maine. And Efficiency Maine is certainly the resource to go to for any charging needs. They've just unveiled a large educational resource on charging and electric vehicle ownership that I would encourage you all to go check out. And I'm happy to actually put that in the chat now so that you can get over there.
Yeah, I'd second that. And they have a bunch of really great short videos that really are really clear and digestible. The one other thing I would, two other things I would mention coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act. One is that there is they did sort of restart the program for commercial charging infrastructure. So if anyone on the call is a business owner, that's definitely something to look at. I think it's up to $100,000 of incentive for installing EV charging infrastructure at a business. And while there is not a residential tax credit for a federal residential tax credit for EV charging, some people are in the position where they needed to upgrade their electrical panel to support EV charging. And there is an incentive for upgrading your electrical panel as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. I believe it's a few $1,000s in tax credits for that. And that comes, of course, along with something that is not within the scope of this presentation, but is also something we work on, which is a ton of home energy and efficiency incentives that are also in the Inflation Reduction Act that are really exciting and people should check out if they're interested.
Great. I think we have time for a few more questions. Let's see. We had David ask if in our survey, we asked if any EV owners had done a battery replacement, and maybe as a follow-up, how frequently does that need to be done with EVs? Do we know how much it costs, that kind of thing?
That wasn't a question that we asked explicitly, but it was noted. We asked about maintenance costs, and in traveling around and talking to electric vehicle owners, one of the things that people are typically most excited about is that you don't need to get an oil change. There are just very few things regarding maintenance besides getting the wheels turned every once in a while, getting your alignment checked. The battery is the one thing that occasionally needs to be replaced or would need to be replaced. We're seeing that electric vehicles have a longer lifespan on the road than gas-powered vehicles do, largely because they don't have a combustion engine and don't have all the problems associated with a combustion engine. There are people that will never have to change the battery throughout the course of their electric vehicle's life. But there are a couple of folks who have gone through that process and have done so relatively easily. There are also propositions out there about buying a backup electric battery pack so that you can have a battery with you in your electric vehicle that you can switch out to extend your range. But I haven't talked to anyone who has actually employed that here in Maine. Yeah.
I just would add, I see Anne's question about brakes in the chat as well. Many electric vehicles have what they call one pedal driving, which I understand takes a little bit of getting used to. I am not an EV owner yet, but aspiring, but have done a few test drives, and basically it decelerates the car as soon as you take your foot off the gas. There's less coasting that happens, but my understanding is that actually has significant impacts on extending the life of brakes. So that's another thing that we've heard. Yeah, there we go. A comment from our colleague Vanessa. It lets the car recapture some of the energy as well to extend the range. So
great. We had this question from Rob. Oh shoot, where was it? About if we have any information on the current availability of EVs and public hybrids here in Maine from different car dealerships. Is there a long waiting period? Are some makes and models more available than others? What is the real life scenario look like?
I can take this one. I think we don't have any specific information about particular dealerships, Rob, but I think EVs are definitely experiencing the same supply chain issues that every vehicle is experiencing. We're in touch with some dealers who are saying that where they ordinarily would have 75 or 100 or more on a given lot, they have maybe a dozen available, and many cars are being having deposits put down or being purchased before they even arrive at the lot. So that's not necessarily something that's unique to EVs, but we are hearing that demand for EVs is higher than it's ever been. I think that's a result of a few things. One is the high gas prices that we experienced in Maine and will likely experience again. It's also a result of more people knowing someone that has an EV, and it becoming a lot more of a common and accepted kind of vehicle. A vehicle is a big purchase. People don't want to necessarily want to dive in without having done their research or having some experience, but more and more people are riding in someone else's electric vehicle or seeing one on the road. And that's really a good chunk of what we are trying to accomplish with the survey, is to show people that these are not necessarily just big city cars, that there are people all across Maine who are towing trailers and delivering microbrews and doing all kinds of things, going hiking, all kinds of things that are really common activities in Maine, and they're really enjoying that experience. And not only that, but they're saving money as well. So I think there's a couple of things behind that.
I think that may be a great place to leave off. I see that some questions are still coming in, but we're coming up on our hour together, unfortunately. I did want to just note one thing that I saw in the chat that sparked my memory, which is that Scott said he had a chance to drive a Ford F-150 Lightning, the electric vehicle model of the Ford F-150 in Norway today, and that will be available at a ride and drive out in South Paris at Oxford Hills Comprehensive High School on October 1st. There are 2 ride and drives in the state on that day for electric vehicle or Drive Electric Week in Maine, excuse me. One of them is going to be in Portland and one of them is going to be in South Paris. And there will be opportunities for attendees to test drive electric vehicles, and there will be several models available to test drive and to check out and talk to the owners of those vehicles if you want to get more insights. So again, that's Saturday, October 1st. We will be at both of those events in South Paris and Portland, and it's a great opportunity to test drive an electric vehicle if you haven't had a chance to, and to come say hi to us and see the printed versions of our survey here. So we'll hope to see you there. And as we wrap up here, really appreciate all of you spending this hour with us. We're always available for more questions about this survey if you want to reach out to us. Keep your eye out for a follow-up email that will include the recording of this webinar, and again, that link to download the narrative report of our survey. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.